Hello, everybody. Welcome. There's not many of us, but we will make a jolly good job of it, as they say. First of all, welcome to you all. First of all, thank you very much to LJ here and Chris at the back there for organising all this and getting it together. Thank you for coming, and thank you to the candidates for turning out to be questioned by us all. Just a quick reminder of the rules. Obviously, we're a small group, but I'm sure you all know. It's just let's all be polite, no discriminatory language, no aggression towards any candidates. Ask questions, ask them nicely. We will try and keep to time, and LJ here will shout up and say, look, you're going on too long, etc., because we do have a few things to get through. Again, if you do ask a question, just try and keep it brief. And to the point. It's a question. It's not your opinion. It's not a rant or anything like that. Okay, it's a question to the candidates. And again, to the candidates, when you do answer, just please answer the question. Don't go off on a tangent if you can. And we would like your answers to be reasonably brief as well, so 2 or 3 minutes long. We are aware that there's a massive question that I'm sure is on everybody's lips. I'll try to remember what it is in a minute, but we will get to that in a minute. But first of all, if I could just ask the candidates to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about themselves and what they're standing for, etc. And I'm going to do this in a first name alphabetical order. So, Alice, you get to go first.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. It's really great to see people here. My name is Alice Gilderdale. I am currently a local councillor in Market Ward. I've been a councillor for 2 years, and now I'm standing to be the local Labour councillor in East Chesterton. I was born and I grew up in Cambridge. I studied here at university, and now I work here for a local homeless charity called It Takes a City. And the reason why I got involved in politics is because when I was a student, I was involved in a lot of student campaigns. For example, the campaign for a living wage at the university, campaigning for local universities to divest from fossil fuels. And I met lots of trade unionists and lots of workers in the university and worked with them for a better university. And through that, I came to discover the Labour Party and become involved in the Labour Party. Through that, and for the past couple of years I've really enjoyed, and it's been such a privilege to represent the residents in Market Ward, and I felt like I've been able to do some really good work there, and now that I've moved into the area, I've decided to move here, and it would be fantastic to have your support in the local elections. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Alice. Bob, you're next.
Thank you, and hello to everybody. I'm Bob Illingworth, and I'm standing as a Liberal Democrat candidate for East Chesterton. I was born and raised in Yorkshire, just outside Bradford, and was educated at a local grammar school there. After university, I joined a company called Whitbread, who at that time owned lots of breweries and lots of public houses, and I learned how to brew Stella Artois and Heineken lagers, as well as Whitbread Trophy Bitter, which you'd have to be nearly as old as I am to remember that one. And then, of course, Whitbread are now better known as the owners of Premier Inn and Beefeater restaurants. In the early 90s, I moved to Green King to work for Green King at Bury St Edmunds as a senior brewer to brew their iconic beers, Abbott Ale, IPA, and Old Speckled Hen. In the mid-90s, I moved to a new home in Cambridge, where I've lived ever since. Since retirement, I've kept my connection with the brewing industry and now set and marked papers for the Institute of Brewing's Master Brewer exams. I love living in Cambridge and have made many friends here. I'm excited by the high-tech sector and the way it's expanding and developing so many fantastic new products and services, not only for Cambridge people, of course, but for the country and the world at large. I'm standing for City Council as I want to be able to help shape East Chesterton, its future, in any way that being a City Council allows. I'd like to give something back, in other words, and I do admire East Chesterton for its diversity of people from different origins and backgrounds. I've spoken several times at full council meetings, on one occasion to urge the introduction of noise control cameras to stop speeding drivers, keeping us all awake late at night. I've also called for the new development in North East Chesterton to have more formal sports facilities, such as cricket pitches, football grounds, tennis courts. It's sadly lacking in those facilities as the current plans stand. I also gained local support to successfully apply for a developer's contribution payment to plant a wildflower meadow in 5 trees open space. This was in response to the possibility that the council was going to build houses in the southern edge of it, and that's something we wanted to try and prevent, to keep a bit more green open space in East Chesterton. This election will be the 3rd time I've stood, so I'm hoping it's going to be 3rd time lucky. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Brilliant timing. Brilliant timing. Exactly 2 minutes. And Colin, you're next on the list.
I'm Colin Miller. I'm standing for the Heritage Party. I've been an NHS dentist in this area for 20 years, over 20 years. I've never been involved in politics, actually. This is all new to me, but I was galvanized into action during the COVID period, because I saw how quickly our freedoms were taken away. So we had, overnight, no freedom of speech, no freedom of choice, no freedom of movement, and no freedom of association. And it was a policy that was brought in by the Conservative government and supported by all the major parties. And I thought we needed to do something about that. The Heritage Party was established as a result about 2 years ago, and it's the only party that opposes lockdowns and COVID mandates. So I hope I can answer your questions. This is all new, but at least we can have a lively debate this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Lovely. And Elizabeth, you next.
Yes. Good evening. My name is Elizabeth May, and I live in East Chesterton on the High Street, where you hear all the vehicles going on. I've lived here for over 13 years. I'm here to represent the Green Party now. I'm now retired from paid work. I have taught most ages, but chiefly people over 18 in full and part-time employment. I've mostly taught biology, and my last job I taught ecology and environmental management in Wales. I was also very lucky to be my university's environment manager, and as such we had a green wildlife area. We reduced our waste and the bills for waste, reduced our energy and water consumption, and I led the Swansea Sustainable Travel Forum, which helped a lot of people in that area travel more sustainably. I also work with the local council, the Welsh Government, and many other organisations. And I also learned an awful lot about biology and ecology from my full and part-time students. I'm also a wife, a mother and a grandmother, and a member of the local Women's Institute, for whom I am a climate ambassador. I've worked hard for one of our local reserves, Logan's Meadow, just under the bridge, near the sewage museum, I call it, where I planted many, many trees. And I spent an awful lot of time in the last 2 summers watering them, and as a result we've got about 90% survived. I also teach courses for the University of Third Age, such as books about sustainability, and Terry Pratchett, we were just talking about Terry Pratchett. I care deeply about the environment and social justice. I try to live a fair life, and have little impact on the environment while still enjoying myself. And I also try and practice what I preach, and that's it. That's me.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. And last but not least, Peter.
Good evening. Thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Peter Birkinshaw. Like Bob, I come from Yorkshire too, but I've only lived in Cambridge since I retired. Previous to that, I worked for 50 years building software. I have a maths degree from Manchester, and I built software for Rolls-Royce, IBM, Rank Xerox, and quite a few other companies. And then when I became self-employed, I worked in Germany for 5 years, in Sweden for 3.5, and in Holland for 2. So any idea that UKIP is anti-foreigners should be despised. It's just not true. We just like to get on with people. My interests are mainly running I'm a member of the committee of the U3A Investment Club, and I also run a course on the history of programming languages. UKIP's interests are mainly trying to keep the roads open for everybody and not spending a lot of money creating wide spaces for cyclists at the expense of motorists. I think we need to be reasonable in the way we use roads, and I'm not in favour of excessive taxation for particular users. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. And thank you again, all the candidates. Right, so what we'll do is we'll move on to the questions. Some questions will come from the chair.
I noticed you've only got 5 candidates and 6 are standing in this area. Could you just share a little bit of information, just the name of the Conservative candidate, or any information about them?
Chris?
Yeah, the Conservative candidate, Frank Ribeiro, and he declined to attend. He was invited, but yeah.
Yeah, there was, they were going to give a statement, but nothing came through.
No.
Okay, yeah, so everyone was invited. Five have to. Right, so some questions will come from the chair to start with, and then the candidates will hopefully answer them, and then we'll invite on this particular on the topic. We'll invite questions from the floor. Try, if you can, obviously pay attention to the questions and try not to repeat a question that has already been asked. Now, I mentioned it, or I alluded it to at the beginning. There is a question that's on everybody's lips. It's been the talk of the city for the last 6 months, I should imagine, of the social media groups, etc. And it is about the sustainable travel zone, or as people call it, the congestion charge. But the official title is sustainable travel zone. And there's been a lot of questions coming in about this via emails, etc. They're all of a similar ilk. I would just sort of précis a few of them and ask a summary question. So within this section, there will be 2 or 3 questions on the travel zone, etc. Okay, so to summarise really, do the candidates support the current Greater Cambridge Partnership proposals? If not, what do you propose? Are there circumstances under which you would support a charge for driving in Cambridge? That's basically a summary. Assuming you're elected as a local councillor, and therefore are bound to represent the views of the constituents, will you accept the proposal of the Greater Cambridge Partnership proposal to restrict private motor vehicles access to the city? Or would you say, no, that's not acceptable? Would you stand up for your constituents' belief? Again, another email came in about virtually the same thing. So basically, candidates, tell us your views on the congestion charge. Do you agree with them as they stand? What proposals would you go for if you don't agree with them? And would you, if it came to a vote, I suspect in council, would you support the views of your constituents, or would you just go with your party's beliefs? And so, yeah, Alice again. So we'll kick off with you. We'll rotate the questions. So you go first with the questions.
Okay, can I just check? Are those all the questions on the congestion charge?
Yeah, so the congestion charge is going to be quite a topic, so we'll give a little bit of time to this, yeah? But yeah, you have your 2 minutes, 3 minutes.
So, do I support the current charge? No, I do not support the current charge or the current proposal. I think, well, speaking to residents on the doorstep, nearly every single person has brought it up, and I can count on one hand the amount of people who support it in its current form. I think that there are various things that people have brought up that I really empathise with. People who travel out of the city and say, I work out and I can't get a bus there. Or people who, like myself, are carers and have to go and pick up an elderly relative or travel to meet someone who lives on their own. The way that it could isolate people has been brought up. Businesses and workers has obviously been a huge part of the conversation. People who work in East Chesterton, we've had wage stagnation and decline for the past 15 years. We're in a cost of living crisis. This seems like a slightly badly timed proposal on top of everything that people are paying at the moment. Businesses in the local area, if you work with tools or if you drive a white van, that's an extra paid cost that you're going to have to pay. You can't put a lawnmower on a bus. You can't carry your electrician's tools on a bus. You need that van or you need your car to continue your work. But I do think it's a shame that part of the discussion, a really important part of the discussion, has actually kind of been brushed over, which is we do really need, and residents of Cambridge really deserve, a really well-functioning public transport system and a really well-functioning system that works for residents. We need better investment in public transport, in rail, in buses, in cycling facilities, in walking spaces to make it safer for people to travel. We need to make sure that if buses are running, they're running at late hours so that people who work in pubs at night are able to get home safely. These are all things that I really, really support and I want to see happen, but I don't currently support the proposal.
We'll come back. We will come back to you. We will come back to you on this subject. So it's just a question that will come later. So Bob, the same question.
Thank you. Yeah, I can't support the current proposal for a flat £5 fee to just travel in Cambridge, especially as it affects so many people going about their day-to-day lives. For me, being selfish, I live on Green End Road. I would drive 500 metres to get onto the A14 and pay £5. That really can't be fair. And I've spoken to a lot of people on the doorstep who, yeah, they live in East Chesterton, but they work outside the city and would get charged. So what I would urge the Greater Cambridge Partnership, the GCP, to do is to re-look at how they want to fund the sustainable travel zone. There are other ways of funding it. I'm not going to go into that. It's their job to come up with these proposals and make it fairer for the great population in Cambridge. We do need better buses. We need a more frequent service. We need more routes, and we need it to run for longer hours. That is absolutely the case in Cambridge. The census in 2021 came back with the figure that over 30% of households in East Chesterton do not own a car. So they need to be better served by buses, and if they use bicycles, they need safer cycle lanes and similarly for pedestrians. So that is my stand on what's generally called the congestion charge. But don't forget, it's so much bigger than just a charge on motorists. It's all about how we get transport in Cambridge improved going ahead, as Cambridge, the super successful city, is expanding and more people moving into the area.
Okay, thank you for that, Bob. Yeah, we will come back to all the candidates to ask them the specific question of what they will propose, what they think should happen. So, but we're just getting the views on the current situation, the proposal. So, Colin.
Yeah, I'm going to repeat myself. I strongly believe in freedom of movement. So nobody should ever be restricted or penalised for making their way around the city, however way they choose. So it needs to be a choice as well. I'm a cyclist. Lots of people around Cambridge are. It has the highest cycling population in the country. But there are people who need to use their cars. So there are old people, sick people, frail people, people with young children, people who need to get to work, people who need to go to hospital appointments, people who need to do their shopping. So they need to use their cars, and they really shouldn't be restricted in any way. I'll just repeat what my colleagues have said. We could do with improvements to our bus service, and that's really about the only way that you can improve public transport in Cambridge, is just to improve the buses. I'm not really sure there's very much more that we can do, and that's my view.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Elizabeth.
The Green Party feels that we can't support the current suggestions for the congestion charge or the sustainable travel area. For a lot of reasons, but one, it will increase inequality because poorer people won't be able to afford the fare. And Cambridge is the most unequal city in the UK. We've got the highest levels of rich and got the highest levels of poor. And I think very often people driving around forget that a lot of people can't afford a car or they can't drive. So we have to either use taxi or other means of getting around. Now the GCP's proposals, and I've read the document quite frequently, they're doing it to basically reduce the congestion, to fund a cheaper bus service, although they've got 2 million or something like that stashed away to pay for this. They're going to improve the bus service first and then make other improvements to public transport. But it is a very, very poor scheme as it stands. The Green Party has been very active on this. The Greater Cambridge Partnership welcomed the 11-page document we put in on the consultation. And my Green Party councillors have been working with various officials in the Greater Cambridge Partnership and others to try and make it more reasonable, to point out things to them they haven't even thought about. But we do need to, as all of you we're going to say, we do need to improve public transport. The number 2, which stops outside my house, used to be every 10 minutes. Now it's every 20 minutes if you're lucky. And it's always packed. Our kitchen looks out on the bus stop. The buses are always full, even at 7 in the morning. So probably need more buses. My daughter, because she can't afford to live in Cambridge, she lives out in the countryside. Their bus service to Barrington has gone down from about 20 buses a day to 3, and none of the weekends. So there's also the issue of Cambridgeshire that it's got an incredibly poor bus service, and a lot of people who are having the poorer jobs in Cambridge have to live out there because you can't afford to buy a house in Cambridge, and then they have to commute in, and it's whatever you do, it seems almost impossible. Anyway, that's enough from me.
There's a balancing act.
Yeah,
we will come back to it. And finally, Peter.
Right, UKIP is totally opposed to any kind of congestion charging. I think one thing that would improve transport in Cambridge is the provision of more car parks, because there are too many people parking on the street who really shouldn't be on the street, and that is helping to block the streets. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. So before we go on to asking the candidates what they think would be a good idea to happen to, there's obviously issues coming up with global warming and everything, and Cambridge is congested slightly. What their proposals are, but can we have any questions from the floor to the candidates on the congestion charge?
All the candidates are saying you want better buses. Now, if you look up Whippet, one of the local bus providers, on their blog, and Stagecoach has said this on the radio as well, the things they need, the things our area need is better funding, but also a key thing is priority for buses, space, so that they're reliable, so that people, buses won't get stuck in traffic. So how, given that you've all said you want better buses, how are you going to solve these two issues, which are the things that are stopping us getting buses, the money and the priorities to keep them regular and efficient? Okay,
yeah, great question. So you've all said we need more buses and a better transport system, public transport system. So how do you propose this is going to happen? We'll start, it's your turn to go first, Bob.
Thank you. Of course, one of the points of the congestion charge is to make people make different choices as to how they travel. And of course, if we're encouraging them not to use their cars by charging them to use their cars, they are being encouraged to use the buses. If that's the case, then the congestion does indeed reduce and buses have a much freer run through the city. But we have to find ways to encourage car drivers to use their cars less. At the present time, 30 to 35% of carbon dioxide emissions in this country are caused by transport. If we are going to achieve net zero by 2050, we have to reduce the number of cars using the roads. It's that, or we're in serious trouble as a planet. Now, as I've already said, I don't fully support the GCP's flat £5, but there needs to be some sort of fee, simply to encourage people to drive less and use the buses more. There's no point in having a super duper bus service that we've all just described up this side of the tables if people aren't going to use it. Thank you.
Colin?
Yeah, your question was basically about funding.
Funding it.
And bus priority, because you can have the best buses in the world, if they get stuck in traffic, people won't use them.
Yeah, okay. The funding issue is very basic. Either comes from taxation or from central government funding. That's the answer. For priority buses, we can look at having bus lanes, or more bus lanes, just to improve access around the city, and that's something that needs to be investigated.
Okay,
That's it.
Elizabeth?
Bus lanes. I think it's
We're
agreed. Well,
sorry, we were talking, the question was how are you going to put the buses in and how are you going to fund it, propose
there's a
it?
big problem in Cambridge in that we have this sort of ancient road pattern, which I think we inherited from the Anglo-Saxons, then the Romans and so on. And we're not allowed to knock down the university. So we've got a problem with some roads like Mill Road where you can't, I never cycle down Mill Road because I know it will completely screw the bus running through the number 2. So I always go over it to try and be more considerate. But it is some roads in Cambridge, it's more or less impossible to get buses down and the cars. So they are looking at all that and trying to do the best they can with it. I've forgotten the other questions. What was the other question? What was the
Well, the question from the floor was, would you like to repeat your question?
Yeah, well, how, given that you've said you want better buses,
Yes.
how would you fund them and make space for them?
Well, I believe the GCP missed out on some funding, but it all gets a bit complicated, all that. The GCP reckons, I've forgotten the figure, they've got about £1 million, so they're going to make the bus service better for 2 years. And once they've done that, this is what they're promising us, then they will introduce a congestion charge. A lot of the public think the congestion charge will come first, and then possibly all the other things. But the idea is they improve the buses, encourage people to use them, and then it will make the congestion charge more palatable, which will then be used for funding the sustainable travel zone. That's the promise in the document. And I think we do have to reduce the amount of cars, probably these gentlemen disagree with me, using the city, because when they had the problems on Elizabeth Way, the cars are backed up to my house and beyond. So we have a problem of, we've got so much traffic trying to get it all through, especially at rush hours and so on. So we've got to try and discourage people from using their cars. And we're now a society that jumps in their car at you know, anything, oh, I'm going to the shops, I jump in the car. Although Cambridge is very, very, top city for cycling. So, I forgot, so that's enough.
We'll leave it there,
Yeah.
and then we'll go on to Peter.
Well, the main problem, of course, with traffic in Cambridge is that we have bus lanes that the buses don't use. I mean, I ride up and down on the number 2 bus quite regularly, and they never drive in the bus lane in Victoria Avenue. So what's the point of having it? We may as well say, well, we'll let everybody use it. And the same is true of many of the other streets as well. On the road down to Trumpington, the limited stop bus won't drive in the bus lane. It drives in the middle of the road. So really, what is the point of having bus lanes unless we tell the bus people you've got to use them? Secondly, as I said before, what we need is more car park. I don't think it's reasonable to say we've just got to restrict car driving, because as has been said before, a lot of people can't actually do their jobs without using motorised transport. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Anna.
Thank you. I think this is a really important question because it clearly comes to the crux of the issue, is that we have congestion in Cambridge, which means the buses are sat in traffic, and we have buses that aren't moving or that aren't regular. But the other issue is that we have a privatised transport system, which means that bus companies can decide whether they run services or not. So a few months ago, the bus stagecoach said we're cutting these services because no one's using them. And actually, people would be using them potentially if they were running, or if they were running regularly, or if they were running for cheaper and for more reasonable fares. So it is this issue of chicken and egg. We need better buses and we need better public transport, and maybe not just buses, because not everyone can use a bus. We need community cars and shared cars and people to feel safe cycling around as well, and we need walking infrastructure. We need a whole range of public transport that is also not run for private profit, because also then investment can go into our transport system and stay within the transport system and work for a transport system that is reasonable and reliable and affordable, and ultimately that's what that would be great, but that obviously depends on government, but also on the GCP as well, to kind of do what they can within the system. What they're proposing is that they invest in the buses till 2028, and then a charge comes in to subsidise that. They've suggested that we franchise the buses, which brings it partially into public control, but there's not much more we can do beyond that, because there's government legislation meaning we can't fully make the buses and put them into public ownership. But it's a really, really difficult question. Like as was said, it's a growing city. The more people who come and live here, the more cars are going to be on the road. So we need to do a whole host of things, and we should be doing them now, because whether or not we have a congestion charge coming in, we definitely need to stop people using their cars as much and relying on their cars as much, and it's for the best of everyone to have a better public transport system. Yeah, but thanks for the question, it's really important.
Okay, thank you, Alice. And there was another question from the back on this.
Okay, you wanted a question rather than a rant, but why do you conflate the two issues? If you want to control congestion, then set the charge at the minimum level for the minimum number of hours required to control congestion. If you want to fund the buses, that's an entirely different issue, which may well result in a very, very different charge. So please separate them. We may only need a congestion charge between 7:30 and 9:30 in the morning, not the whole day. And just a quick remark to Bob's point about CO2, that's very important. But if that isn't, then that's one of the considerations. Why not have a huge discount for electric cars?
Well, to be fair, it's the Greater Cambridge Partnership that have come up with these proposals. The question was, we need the candidates aren't responsible for that. We're trying to ask them what they would do.
Would they disconnect the need to fund the buses from the need to control congestion?
Well, there's another. We'll come back to there's another question coming. Yeah, go on.
You're looking at buses, but then get stuck actually when it comes to working out how the buses should work. Have other parties looked at other transport systems? I mean, things like rail-based trams.
Well, okay, so let's just do. Sorry, go on, Chris.
Yeah, I think my question probably relates to those as well. Talking about other types of transport, do you think a bus network alone is sufficient, would give sufficient additional options to get people out of cars, or do you think there are other types of transport we need? And more generally, if we don't go for a congestion charge, do you have any ideas as to how the local authorities could be raising money to invest in public transport, because it clearly needs capital investment, it also needs ongoing subsidy, there's no other way around transport.
I think it is a question, and probably a very difficult one to answer, but we'll try and give it a go. So the question Chris has put forward is, apart from buses, what other ways of transport, and what would your proposals be to get over the situation that we're in? We do need to reduce the amount of cars coming into Cambridge. That's probably a no-brainer. We also need to have a better public transport system. But so apart from buses that we've talked about, what other ways would you think of getting people into the city or around the city, and indeed funding it? How would you fund it? So it looks like it's Colin's turn to go first on that particular question. And if you feel you've already answered the question, please, you can say.
The size of Cambridge is not really conducive to anything other than buses as far as public transport is concerned. We're really not big enough to warrant an underground system or a tram system. We really need to, we rely on the bus network, really. So other alternatives, I'm open to suggestions, but I can't really see anything other than the buses, to be honest. I know there's a lot of congestion during the weekend in the city, and I think that is from people outside of Cambridge coming in for recreation shopping. And we do have a solution, because there are park and rides all over the city. If they're not being used, then we should know why they're not being used. If there's a reason, then we can find a solution. So I think that's all that I've got to say on that.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Okay. There is a light tram rail system which apparently could be useful on some of the major routes through the city. We've got discussion of that in the thing we've submitted to GCP. The other thing we could think about is car sharing. Now, I ran the first public-private car sharing system in Wales, I think in the UK, but we had a low take up because where I was in Swansea, they had a huge area and people came and went all kinds of the day. But we did get some take up on that. But nowadays things have moved on and you can get apps for car sharing. So you can put your name and details on a car sharing app and use them, and that apparently has been quite successful in Oxford. So we could look at that. And the way, you know, younger people, well, they're all on apps, so I think that would be very successful. The other thing that's happened with lockdown is that people are working at home increasingly. Now, we've been discussing that quite a bit in the Green Party. Is that change in work patterns going to persist? I know the County Council made their staff come in when the lockdown went, but I know a lot of people who still maybe work. My son-in-law works at home all the time, and other people only go into work 1 day a week. And this has had knock-on effects for the rail system. But patterns of work have changed, and so we have to recognise that. But I do think some apps for car sharing, maybe a light tram system, although what's his name, James Palmer, the mayor for Cambridge, he spent quite a few million, I think, on looking at an underground system which didn't work out. It's very, very difficult. We do have park and rides. They're used all through the week. I think they shut at 7 now. But I know a personal friend who tried on a busy Saturday. They were waiting for over an hour for the park and ride bus to come. So there are issues with them. The other thing is we have an issue in Cambridge, and that the lower paid staff, people can't get lower paid staff because A, they can't afford to live in Cambridge, and B, the public transport system is rubbish. So I mean, we seem to be in chicken and egg scenarios and whatever we do.
Thank you for that. So Peter?
Right.
On
I
the specific question.
I welcome the introduction of electric powered buses because that will certainly reduce the emission of fumes because previously buses were mainly diesel and the electric bus is obviously a vast improvement. I don't think it is reasonable or practical to actually restrict the access by cars. I think what you need is somewhere to put them when you're not using them. Alternatively, you could ask people to take a taxi, but that is just simply transferring the load from one vehicle to another.
Okay, thanks Peter. Alan?
I wanted to address the gentleman's question because there have been debates had about do we exempt electric cars, do we charge from 9 to 11 when the congestion is, and I feel very conflicted about this because personally I would not really want to support a charge that just comes in between say 7 and 11 because a lot of people who work flexibly and are paid higher don't have to come in. They can work from home, then they come in and work from their office or their lab from 11 AM. Whereas if you work in a school or if you work in a shop or you have to open your business at 9 in the morning, those people who really are kind of your key workers are the most impacted by that charge. And I feel like a lot of the debate or a lot of what I've been saying is we want working people to not be the most impacted, and by having it on those hours it means that it is. But it is clearly the time when the city is the most congested, so that's a really tricky thing to try and deal with. On electric cars, obviously they're not as polluting in some ways, but people who can afford to buy an electric car, I imagine could probably afford to pay a charge to come in. Electric cars are very expensive to buy at the moment, and the poorest people can't afford an electric car. So the people, again, the poorest people would have to pay the charge, and the probably richer and more affluent people in the city would have to pay, would be exempt. And that doesn't seem fair to me either. And you know, as in the next few years, more and more people will be buying electric cars. So say in 10 years, 10% of the population has, 10% of car-owning people have non-electric cars, then the charge is kind of defunct because no one is paying the charge anymore. So again, I personally wouldn't support exempting electric vehicles for those reasons. Rail and light tram, I just don't think we have enough time to put something in that that would necessarily solve these travel problems in the city. So much of the city is listed buildings, very, very difficult to get planning consent for things. It would be a nightmare and it would cost so much money. I feel like we should spend this money on the buses or spend it on the public transport.
Sorry, we're trying to keep it to time. Yeah.
There's
Bob.
too many questions.
No, it's good. We'll come back to them.
Thank you. Yeah, light rail trams I cannot see working under any circumstances in Cambridge. The streets are simply too narrow, plus the wire work would look absolutely horrendous. So I think trams are out. The underground proposed by the previous mayor was extremely expensive, and it was just 2 lines, which would, when you look at Cambridge, it's completely surrounded by villages, people wanting to come in. To get to one of the stations, what are they going to use? They're going to use buses. Well, you know, if you're going to use bus to get to the station, the whole journey might as well be by bus. But I think we've said enough on this topic, so I'll finish there.
The gentleman in the check shirt there had a question.
Yeah, I just want to say that I don't know. I just feel like when we've got candidates kind of discussing things like a light rail system or car sharing, I think that illustrates how bad the buses are in Cambridge. Like for a city this size, you know, I just don't know why we're kind of mentioning these other options, which seem kind of ludicrous in a way, when actually it's so much clearer that you know, just improving the buses would just have such a better impact. And I think, as Alice mentioned, I think it doesn't address the issue of, you know, the kind of reason why this has come up in the debate, which is the costs of the GCP scheme, which, if you had a light rail system, would be significantly more expensive. So I just don't see how we can't just improve the buses as a pretty basic form of public transport.
So, have you got a specific question to the candidate?
And more of a statement.
No, okay. So, no, fair enough. I mean, just as something quite interesting. I mean, I'm sure. Does anyone notice? Does anyone know what the city coat of arms is in Cambridge? You've got bridges. You've got bridges, ships, and seahorses. The association with the sea, because Cambridge actually started in medieval times because of its brilliant river transport system, which could be used.
Some climate change scenarios, you might have the sea here soon.
Yeah, we could all go to the beach fairly soon.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jerry Beijing, what a future, yeah?
Okay, just a quickie on the buses. The buses, yeah, we need new
Is
buses.
this a question, Jerry, yeah?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a question. We need new buses. The only trouble with buses is you can only get one wheelchair on there, so that causes a problem for disabled people. Disabled people can't use taxis because a lot of the taxis won't take wheelchairs because they say it takes them too long. We have Dial a Ride, which is a great service, but they don't have many vehicles, so that's another thing. So I'd like to ask the candidates what they do for the disabled people and the elderly that need public transport just to go shopping and stuff like that.
Okay, yeah, good question, Jerry, thank you. And Elizabeth, it's your turn to go first.
Terrible one. I've often sat on the two and somebody who is on with a pram and then somebody else gets on with a wheelchair. We're all trying to budge around to let them all move in, but it is an issue. I think it has improved some Disabled Act in, 15, 20 years ago. I don't know. Maybe we need a sort of dial-a-ride, it's been mentioned before, for disabled. Maybe we need more disabled parking bays in the city so people with disability, not everyone who's disabled can drive a little vehicle. I think that's a tricky one, and I don't know the answer to that one. I think 2 wheelchairs on the buses is probably all you're going to get.
It's a valid point Jerry's making, a good question.
Good question.
So Peter.
Yes, I think the only way you could possibly improve it is by having specially designed buses, almost entirely, just for disabled vehicles. But you couldn't afford to do that every 20 minutes. You'd have to have one every couple of hours or so, just to, and possibly even restricted on number of days, because otherwise you'd never make it economical.
Okay, thank you. Alan, on Jerry's question?
It has been discussed, the possibility of getting buses that have more spaces for wheelchair users and for buggies, so doubling the space. I know that when the proposals were worked up, people started saying, could we have buses that you could put your bike on the back and things like this, and suddenly people are saying, how do we get buses to work for Cambridge and for people who live in Cambridge, and maybe that's possible, and hopefully it is, but it's really, really important that we involve people who use the buses and people on wheelchairs and with hidden disabilities as well in these discussions. On the taxis, we need much stricter licensing rules on taxis. Taxis at the moment can deny or cancel or not take a passenger because they say it costs more, because taxis don't charge until the passenger is in the vehicle. So taxi drivers don't accept it if they know that it's someone in a wheelchair, because they have to get out and put the wheelchair in the car. We need to work with the surrounding districts around Cambridge who also license taxis. I mean, most taxis in Cambridge are licensed by South Cambridge. They need to have much stricter rules on making sure that drivers accept wheelchair users. But nationally, we need much stricter rules on this, because taxi drivers just do not accept people on wheelchairs. It's awful.
Okay, thank you, Alice. And
Buried in the GCP's proposal is taxi drivers will not pay the congestion charge if their taxi is wheelchair accessible. So I imagine some taxi drivers may well take that up. So hopefully we will get more taxi accessible to wheelchairs. I'm sure the bus companies can make more space on the buses for more wheelchairs, but I'm no expert on bus design. I mean, we can all look at the inside of a bus and think, well, I could put a couple of wheelchairs there and moved a few seats. I don't know, but it is something that certainly could be introduced into bus design.
thank you, Bob. And Colin, do you want to say this?
I think that's quite an easy problem to solve. There should be more than increased space for wheelchairs or buggies and prams on buses. You can have fold-up, flip-up seats. That shouldn't really be a major problem. That should be sorted out quite easily.
Okay, thank you. Looking at the time, I think we've spent an awful lot of time on this elephant in the room. So let's just move away from the congestion charge. I know all the questions weren't answered, and you will have had more questions, but we've got other things to get through. The next questions that came through actually were on transport on roads, but slightly away from the sustainable travel zone. And then the emails that came in, a couple of questions, and we could probably mix the two together. One of the email reads, Nuffield Road has a school and a medical centre, very, very close to us, we're on Nuffield Road, has a school and a medical centre and leads to residential streets, but it doesn't feel a safe place to walk and cycle. Plans for a protected cycle lane were abandoned a few years ago, and since then at least 2 children have been hurt by dangerous drivers. What would you do to improve the roads around East Chesterton? And coupled with that, what would you do as a city councillor to get the potholes in the High Street fixed? And whose turn is it to go first? It looks like it's Peter's got this one.
Good question. Is this just restricted to Nuffield Road or
East Chesterton.
just East Chesterton?
Yeah, it was Nuffield Road is an example.
Well, I think it would be a good idea to make sure that the markings on the roads are well maintained, because a lot of the roads around here, you can't see that there used to be a white line where the cycle lane was. And that certainly needs to be renewed. think it's a bit idiotic to have these sort of magic bus stops whereby the cyclists ride round the back of them, and the bus now has to stop in the middle of the road, which obstructs the road completely. At the top of, just down the road from here, they had an island when the bus shelter, which the bus shelter's now disappeared, but it was perfectly okay when the bus used to pull into the lay-by. Instead of that, we've now got a footpath which is 12 foot wide. And who on earth needs a footpath 12 foot wide? It's just a waste of road space. Was there more question?
Potholes?
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously we should be spending more money repairing the roads than we're doing at the moment. I'm not sure quite how you get the money from anywhere else. I think there may be the possibility of getting a national scheme to repair potholes, because they're not just in Cambridge. Everywhere in the country has got potholes at the moment.
To be fair, potholes are county council responsibilities. It's a bit of an unfair question to the city councillors. But I mean, obviously, as an elected councillor, you would be putting pressure on your colleagues in county to actually try and make the streets of Chesterton safer, etc. It's not, safer for lighting and for small children, people going out late at night, etc. So, Alice, you second on this one.
Fantastic. On the streets and making the roads safer, I don't know about the specific proposal for a cycle lane on Nuffield Road, but I definitely think that having protected cycle lanes is important. I know that some areas in the city have school streets at the beginning of the school day when lots of kids are going in and out. They close the street temporarily with volunteers so that the children can get in and out of school, and the same at the end of the day. I don't know whether that would be something the residents would support, but I definitely know that it works well in other areas that have vehicles travelling through them. In terms of potholes, I know we all laugh, but it's actually not a laughing matter. The potholes in Cambridge, they are terrible, and speaking to people, we've got a cost of living crisis right now, and people are saying, my car tyre burst on Chesterton Road the other day, and it's like, how am I going to fork out £100 to spend on a new tyre, or my suspension's gone, and it's absolutely awful. Or you're cycling in the dark and you don't see it and you fall off your bike, and it's shocking and it's really, really dangerous. The roads have been in serious managed decline for the past 30 years, and the under road is failing. We need to redo the whole road, and we can be putting pressure on. I know that the county councillor has been putting pressure on the county council to just redo the whole thing, because replacing them and then letting them go and replacing them, it's wasting money. It's completely wasting money. We just need to get the whole thing redone, and same for many areas in the city. It's the same all over the city, and it's really shocking.
Okay, thank you. Bob?
The Nuffield Road should be an access to Cambridge North Station via the track alongside the busway, and you're quite right, that scheme to provide that was abandoned. I can't remember why now, but it should be brought back. It definitely needs a separate cycle lane along Nuffield Road. I'd go further than that, which is I would block off Nuffield Road just beyond Discovery Way, and I'd make all the traffic going into Nuffield Road Industrial Estate go via the little bit of the busway up to Milton Road. That would cure a lot of traffic, not only on Nuffield Road, but of course on Green End Road as well. So that's two improvements I would make there. The potholes are the responsibility of the county, but I would point out that it's the government who pays the counties and the other local authorities to repair the roads, and they have kept underfunding for the last 10 to 12 years. It's a disgrace that the government is allowing our roads to get into the state they're now in, but it is truly a government problem. So it's no surprise that the Conservative candidate, East Chesterton, didn't want to come along and explain explain why the roads are so underfunded.
Okay, thank you. Well, Colin?
Yeah, I'm a cyclist. I've never noticed a problem on Nuffield Road, to be honest. Green End Road has a dedicated cycle lane. If Nuffield Road needs one, then one should be put in. I don't understand why there isn't one. The potholing is parlous. Newmarket Road near Tesco is particularly bad, and it's dangerous. So whoever's responsible for that needs to get it done.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I think the county council is very short of money to fix things like potholes and what have you. I think the government announced an extra 2 million for the whole country to fix the potholes. 2 million for the whole entire country. There is an issue that we had, probably because of climate change, we had an exceptionally cold whole week of ice and snow before Christmas. I know people who fell over and broke wrists and what have you. And that's really, the potholes did very well out of that. We share a car, my daughter, and we've had to pay out for a new suspension, haven't we? And it's just awful because you see, is it Barbarellas? Cars come along and they swerve out to avoid the potholes, and then on the other side they're trying to avoid it. We're going to have a huge accident, and then as something you said, you're cycling along in the dark and you don't see the pothole. It's really terrifying. I don't like going out at night on my bike because of it. What can we do? I don't know what we can do. I think the potholes, there is some law about if it's more than a foot deep, you can get it done immediately, but it doesn't seem to be happening. Definitely a bus lane in Nuffield Road, possibly some speed bumps. I think Ian was in charge of County Council when we had speed bumps put along Chesterton High Street.
I've never been in charge of the county
Well, I was
council.
going to say, it's a promotion.
Yeah.
I mean, if it was, it would be great.
Well,
we don't park anywhere.
The problem is we get such heavy lorries. I think there was a new European law, and there's a big debate about it 25 years ago. Should we allow these exceptionally heavy lorries, I don't know, 8 wheels or something? Do anyone know? Anyway, we decided it would make money for us, so we went through. But Chesterton High Street is pounded by really heavy lorries. There's supposed to be a 100 weight.
There is.
But nobody takes any notice.
Well, it comes
Yeah.
on some of the
But the
points.
police haven't got the people power to manage it.
Well, the council then said that.
Issue,
Yeah.
that if the level, most of the heavy lorries, I think, coming through the village are ending up going down Fen Road to the industrial estates on Fen Road.
Yeah.
There are heavy lorries coming down Green Road to go round into the Nuffield Road estate, mainly to Regions. If the level crossing was closed and a bridge built over the railway to connect with Cowley Road, then all the heavy traffic would come straight into the Fen Road industrial estate via Cowley Road, Milton Road and Cowley Road, and not through the village.
Great idea, yes,
Yes.
please.
Can I just say about
We've
that?
been pushing for this for some time, but that is the best solution.
James,
Can I just say that being not political at all, it's Network Rail that have to actually agree to that, so that's a cross-party issue.
It's a
to be
rebate,
fair.
I think it's
It's
beyond the
Network
city
Rail would have
council.
to
that
give
question.
it permission, and they haven't yet.
Network Rail, as I understand it, are more than happy to help build the bridge, but they need other funding
Yeah.
to complete it, because running and maintaining level crossings is extremely expensive. So they would much prefer to have a bridge, but they won't fund the whole thing themselves. So it's doable, we just need the money for it, which I would have thought could have been part and parcel of the development in northeast Cambridge.
Okay. Sorry, Alice, you want something to say on this as well?
I thought that this would be a whole question in itself, but because it's such a big issue along Fen Road and the level.
Okay, well, why don't we make it, why don't we Why don't you kick off the next round with no, because when you first up with this proposals, I mean the difficulty of Fen Road, the heavy traffic that does go through the village, which it goes through quite illegally, a lot of it, but again it's not policed, there's lots of knock-on issues and that sort of thing. But yes, go ahead. What would your proposals be for solving the issues of Fen Road, crossing new bridges, etc., etc.?
Well, as far as I'm aware, Network Rail and the developers have agreed that something will need to happen and that they're happy to work with the councils on it. Obviously the City Council and the County Council to be involved as the Highways Authority. The proposal currently is to extend Fen Road. Currently it just kind of peters out. So the area north-east of Cambridge, the Fen Road would be an access point, and instead of going back into the city through Chesterton and Fen Road, you go out, up to the A14 and then in through the A14, A10, Milton Road roundabout and back into the city that way. And without, obviously if there's going to be development in North East Cambridge, there has to be some sort of access into the city that way, because without that we're just getting stuck at the barrier that's closed more than it's open. And there are so many problems, and that whole area, all the residents are so isolated there, and no development can happen without a solution. So, you know, it sounds like there'll be a pedestrian and a cycle bridge, but I mean, a bridge for cars is really expensive, but if we extend the road and connect it in, then people can either go north at that roundabout, they can go west, or they can join A14, or they can come into the city that way. At least that's what's being talked about at the moment.
Okay, so Bob, you've mentioned to me, so Colin, do you want to say something about the Fen Road situation?
I can't comment on that. I don't know any details.
Okay, fair enough. Elizabeth?
Right, that seems a jolly good idea. I just wonder where all the funding is going to come for it. I can't think. I mean, that does presuppose that the northeast, the removal of the sewage works to the green belts, Honey Hill, go ahead. But that's another story. But it's a good idea. Yeah.
Peter?
Don't know enough about the problem to offer a solution.
Okay, fair enough. And I mean, it does bring any questions from the floor on this, and it does come into bring on to the next topic that we're going to talk about, which is one, planning and development, about what's going on around Cambridge North and the northeast Chesterton. But I mean, I think we've probably answered some of those questions. Don't go on a question there, please.
Yes, I mean, I'm not fully up to date with where North East Cambridge is at the moment, but from my knowledge it seems that they are watering down plans for the development rather than adding in extra ambitious road bridges. And I mean, the latest I knew about it was there was just going to be a walking and cycling bridge there. I mean, if Network Rail, if work has moved on that and they are looking at road connection, that would be good. But from what I've sort of heard at the moment, links were being watered down from our area to across that development and out.
Do you know why? Can I ask you a question? Why? Is it just to save money for the developers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a complicated development with lots of different landowners, and there are other things tied in, like the GCP Water Beach to Cambridge public transport route, Greenway, and but
Okay.
I'm not.
Thank you. Sorry.
On the planning and development, we got an email from a young lad, didn't we? Who said he wanted, who asked, I want more green spaces and more places to do sport in East Chesterton. How could we get help with this? And then there's another email coming about someone needing a climate and active travel conference here, and the pupils were asking about. They feel that East Chesterton is like right on the edge of, well, we are on the edge of town, but at the edge of the city. But they feel like a very poor relation. In fact, that there's no access to local sports fields. There's no local cinema. There's no, there's no tennis courts. There's no museums. There's no cricket grounds. There has been some developments on St Andrew's Rec, but they're asking for more. So, candidates, what would you do for the youngsters and the sporty and the people that want to do more stuff in East Chesterton? What would you do to create East Chesterton to be a more pleasurable place to be in for the residents in terms of leisure and sport? And I think it's your turn to go first, doesn't it, Bob?
Okay, well, as I already mentioned, I did speak at the council meeting and asked for more formal sports facilities to be provided in the new North East Cambridge development. So we're talking of just exactly what Tim has mentioned: football pitch, cricket pitch, tennis, and I think a swimming pool. These are all possible because of the developer's contribution when they build such a big development. There's nowhere else it can go. East Chesterton is desperately short of open spaces. We've got, as somebody mentioned, Logan's Meadow in the far west. We've got the 2 or 3 children's play areas. We've got the local nature reserve just round the corner. And we've got 5 trees, and that's really for green space. That's about it. There's also a little bit of green space in front of Brownsfield Community Centre. So it's absolutely vital, and I've been pushing for this, and I've already said that much more sports facilities are provided at North East Cambridge Development.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Colin?
Yeah, I'll just echo that. Any new development really needs to encompass green areas, just for everybody's health and welfare, really, and an improved quality of life. But I don't think East Chesterton needs to be isolated from the rest of the city. There's a lot of sports centres available in the city. There's about a dozen gyms, and there's no reason why people from this area shouldn't be able to go into town and use them, really. I'm a bit confused sometimes with younger people, because there's a lot of facilities that have been put up in the city. There was a skateboarding ramps put up, there was outdoor gym equipment put out just near the river, but I never see anybody using it. So, you know, asking for more facilities is great, but I just hope people will use them.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth?
Okay, the gym at Logan's Meadow is used quite a lot. Very frequently I cycle over that bridge and people are on it. So that's quite popular. And then, is it the Pie Rec we call it? That's used a lot for football matches and so on. And they've just put up a new changing structure, I don't know, it's, I think it's owned by the football group or somewhere. And then there's I think it's been called the Pump Ramp, skating ramp. My grandchildren had a lovely time going all around there the other day.
St Andrew's Rec.
St Andrew's Rec, they all name different things. We've also got the Chesterton Sports Facility on just to the bottom of East Chesterton, which you can get to. And as you say, you can get on the number 2 bus or get on your bike and go into town. I do think this new development, which I'd rather didn't go ahead, but anyway, any new development of that size should have sports facilities, cinemas, schools. I think there's a school there, and things. Otherwise, they'll just be in a ghetto with just loads and loads of houses and no green space. Just dreadful. I have been to a number of their consultation events and asked about green space. They told me they're going to put lots in. I've looked at the details. I think there's gardens and allotments there. But I think it just should be always in any large development, there should be facilities for the public so that they can do things. Green spaces, I just want to say something because it's one of my primary loves. I think everyone should be within walking distance of a green space, but apparently 68% of Cambridge residents aren't. And I think walking spaces is kind of half a mile We need to hold on to all our green space. In Arbury, they've built some houses on a park up there, presumably because people didn't think they were so important. But I think we need to keep all the green space we have, and I think as an individual we should look after our own green space, even if it's just a potted plant or a window box. And we should support the Cambridge Canopy project and water those trees. They popped around all around the city,
Okay.
and everything else. Sorry, I've gone
No,
on to
no,
one.
fine. Peter, thank you, Peter.
Well, I suppose I'm a bit biased in this respect because when I was at school, I hated sport. I preferred playing chess. So, but I'm quite happy that we have more green spaces, and we certainly need a lot more trees. But I think people in East Chesterton are fairly easy reach of the town centre facilities, and I think they're admirable.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Alice?
Green space is clearly really important. In our last year's manifesto, we said that we were going to double the amount of green space in Cambridge City, increasing it by the size of Hyde Park within the city, which is fantastic. We have schemes like, I think it's called Trees for Babies, where if you give birth, you get given a tree by the city council for free, and you can plant it in your garden. It's really important that people have access to green space. The pandemic has shown us that. It's so important for people's mental health and physical health. If you can't afford to go to the gym, you can go to the park and run around the park, or run up and down the river, or use the outdoor gym equipment. It's really important, and I completely agree. If developers are building in the city, we need to build wholesome communities that have all the things that they need within walking distance. If North East Cambridge is going to go ahead, it's going to be part of the new local plan. We're putting really, really high environmental and community standards into the local plan, so any new development would have to have within 10 minutes or 15 minutes a local shop, a local community facility, a green space, and not just green spaces but allotments and things like that as well, so that any new developments when the local plan comes in would be beholden to those rules. As well as that, we need to make sure that our current green space is kept to really high standards as well. We can't just create more green space and not nurture it and not make sure that it's well kept, and we're doing that as well. I think it's really important that we make sure that all of the green spaces are looked after in the city.
Moving on from that green space question, actually, someone last night asked me to ask this question to the candidates, and it's on the same topic. They wrote it down for me. It's along the lines of the summer rain will be once again amongst us, and leading to flooded roads. All the corners on the road, particularly by Water Street, etc., due to the blocked or inadequate drains that we have around the city, or the gutters, etc., etc. And the question that they wanted to ask the questions was, what do the candidates think about limiting the installation of block paving, driveways, etc., which cause an awful lot of water to run off into the streets, down to the drains, overpowering them, over flooding them? And what encouragement would the candidates on behalf of the City Council give to people to not necessarily put in block paving to park their cars or whatever, but maybe more sustainable green spaces like the odd tree, gravel, etc., with natural soakaways, etc. And that was a question from someone who I invited to the meeting last night but couldn't make it for reasons of a football match, apparently. But there we go. So that question goes first to Colin.
It really comes down to education. People shouldn't be forced to do anything. As long as you can get people to understand that the paving is causing a problem, then they'll be more amenable to doing something about it. And there are a lot of solutions. You can get all sorts of paving that allows the soil to penetrate, so that the water doesn't run off and actually sinks into the soil. So there's, it's not an insurmountable problem. It's just that people need to understand that there are better options available.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth?
Well, we don't normally get rain in the summer. We had a very wet rain, and the Environment Agency just declared we're still in a drought state, but that's not quite relevant to the suggestion. I believe it's law that you shouldn't put a surface down without it being permeable. I think it's been law for about 10 years, but no one seems to take any notice of that, and I don't think we've got the manpower to manage that. And if you get a cheap front space done by a local handyman, he might not know about the sustainability regulations. But it's one of the reasons why we get flooding, etc., all over the country, because we're increasingly getting these sudden downpours due to climate change. Increasingly, people have paved over their front garden so they can park their car. So it's a really big issue. You can do something about the drains. I suppose you could go and clear them up every now and again we're short of money. But I think education, encouraging people to think about it, encouraging small contractors to think about sustainable spaces. That is about it. I don't think we've got the money for having a workforce that goes around saying, "Oh, that once you've just done is not on." But we should just encourage people. The local Cambridge matters we get, maybe we should have articles in there. A lot of people read that.
No, thank you. Alice?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I mean, undeniably we are in a climate crisis, and by talking about the downpours and floods that they cause, we need to solve the climate crisis first and foremost, and dealing with paving and stuff is important, but there are bigger things that we should be doing as a council to encourage private homeowners and big companies or investors or people in the city to be making changes to their surroundings and their lives and the way that they work to try and solve the climate crisis. And obviously this can be part of a package of things, but as a council we do provide loads of information and support for homeowners on how they can do things about solar panels and retrofit and things like that. And obviously this is one area, but ultimately we shouldn't just be managing the climate crisis, we need to be solving it. We need to be solving the problem in the first place. But yeah, if there's anything we can do to stop flooding, then we should try and do it.
Okay, thank you. Bob?
I'll be as quick as I can. In order to stop people not having proper drains on their paved over areas, the council really needs to think about not reducing or indeed increasing the number of planning compliance officers. Without these people checking up on planning applications, including paved driveways, the problem can only get worse.
I don't think you need planning permission to pave your driveway.
No, but you need to abide by the regulations about drainage from, which is a planning issue.
Okay. Has anyone on the floor got any questions on that sort of topic? Yes?
Yeah, but links into conservation. Does the parties have any?
Oh, hang on, sorry.
Got Peter.
Oh, no, we finished with Bob on that one.
No,
Oh,
he
you
was
are.
listening
You
before
never
me.
passed me.
Did not. I'm sorry, Peter. I've got my things mixed up.
Right.
Apologies.
Well, just to digress slightly, I will have to tell you that it's a matter of atmospheric physics that we can do nothing at all about climate change which will have any effect in under 250 years. Right? Because the CO2 that's doing it is already up in the atmosphere.
That's true.
You need a lot more trees to actually get it down. That's that one. Secondly, a lot of the flooding is not caused by people's drives or gardens, It's caused by these stupid bumps they keep putting in the roads, which is stopping water draining. And if you look at the footpath outside the haymakers, it is permanently flooded. And the reason, because the road is higher than the footpath. So could we please have some sense in the way they're designing the road surfaces, so that the water naturally gets into the drains?
Okay, thank you. Sorry I missed you out. Sorry, and then let's go back to your question.
Yeah.
You have
Do the parties have any views on the destruction of the Art Deco Hobson Street cinema? Would you support it? Would you object to it? Yeah.
I'll come back to you. So, the question.
The Art Deco cinema. It's about your views and attitudes towards conservation in the city. Which, as an example, which is obviously not necessarily in your brief, being East Chesterton, but nevertheless, it's a good question, I think, in revealing your attitude towards projects like this. Yeah. So the plans of Cambridge City to allow the destruction of the Art Deco cinema facade in Hobson Street, for example. Is it something that you would endorse and support, or is it something that goes against your views when it comes to planning and to conservation?
I'm ignorant. I know where the cinema is. I'm ignorant of what the plans are. I don't know if anyone else.
The plans are to take down the whole building, including the facade, into Sydney Street, retaining the facade of Sydney Street but destroying the facade in Hobson, which is of course a more interesting, architecturally more interesting one.
And what are they going to do with it?
Put offices in.
Okay, all right. So,
yeah.
So the
and
question,
limited amount
the question to the candidates that they're going to take away what used to be and could possibly be some sort of leisure facility.
There are a variety of options. Yes,
So,
it's also about conserving an existing
buildings
and a building that is pretty unique in the whole of East Anglia.
Okay, that's a fair question. Elizabeth,
I knew you'd come to me on this.
Well, it's your turn.
I read the article in The Independent last week about Anthony Carpin getting very angry about it. I mean, I've sat waiting for buses by the cinema there, and it's not been occupied for about 20 years, so goodness knows what it's like inside. I don't know what the state of repair is. I haven't read a lot about it. But you're right, we should preserve our architectural gems. But we have got a problem that with lockdown, there's a lot of shops have closed down, like Monsoon and so on. So we haven't got the rents coming into dear old Cambridge University from their buildings. But it seems to me that Cambridge City Centre is turning into a non-stop cafe, really. There's so many cafes and eateries. It doesn't seem, a lot of people go to Ely now or other little towns because they can't go actually shopping in Cambridge. But I don't know, I haven't looked at the actual detail of the development. I do look at a lot of developments. But I think if we've got something that's truly good and you seem to know what you're talking about, then surely the city would want to preserve it. But then we've got the political expediency of trying to get rents in the buildings, and apparently there's a long ongoing problem. So it's a difficult one. Anyway, not much of an answer, but that's my honest opinion.
Peter, I'm not going to miss you on this time.
Right. Well, the one good thing about that empty cinema in Hobson Street is it provides a shelter when you're waiting for the bus when it's raining. Any development, I think, would probably be nice, but it mustn't lead to any more congestion in Hobson Street. The buses can hardly get down there now.
Alice?
Thank you. As a councillor in the area, I obviously know a little bit about the Hobson cinema. I think it's a real shame. So just to make it clear, this is not owned by the City Council, it's not owned by the university. It's owned by a private developer who bought it a few years ago and left it to sit. They originally, when they bought it, they said they'd retain the facade. Now they've come up with proposals that removes the facade and puts in clear glass and big windows. Part of the proposal is Hobson's Passage, which is a horrible passage. It's full of waste from businesses, and it's really not very nice. So part of the brief was to improve Hobson's Passage. I feel like they've used that potentially as a way to remove the facade and turn it into a big glass building, because there's more viewing into the passage and it turns it into a more public space, the whole thing. I think it's a real shame. I think that the architecture that there is in Cambridge is very exclusive. It's for the university, it's for the colleges, you have to pay to go in. Where there is beautiful architecture that was for the public, for a bingo hall and then a cinema, we should retain it for the community and for people to enjoy, without having to pay to go into the colleges or to the university. I think it's a real shame that the developers are now saying it's not possible to retain the facade. I think it was about £6 million they paid for the building. I'm sure there is some way to retain it, and turning it into office space. Obviously, they're trying to make money from the space. They have said there's going to be community space, but I've been saying we need more community space. There's a huge lack of space in the city, especially for people to use for free, without having to pay for a coffee or without having to pay to go somewhere. But for anyone who's interested, tomorrow in Guildhall from 2 until 7 p.m, in person, the developers are doing a consultation on the Hobson proposal. So I'm going to be there, other people I'm sure, I know Anthony Coppell's going to be there as well.
Yeah.
Come along and speak to the developers and raise your concerns, because I think they're really valid.
Okay, thank you. Bob?
Can I ask if the building has listed status?
I don't think it has, which is something that I completely cannot fathom why. It is absolutely
If it's important to building as you suggest, it really ought to have listed status. And is it just the facade you want to reach?
Well, I mean, the facade is the most important part of the building. I do not know. I've never been inside. I've seen pictures that have been taken some time ago of the performance hall itself having Art Deco kind of features to it. It would make a great indoor market to move the market into there and allow the city to redevelop the marketplace.
There was an application to turn it into a
nightclub bar,
entertainment club,
burlesque kind of.
burlesque club, I suspect. But then people thought the streets would be just full of naked people running around being naughty.
No, it was a licensing
and I think
issue.
that
It's
the license got revoked or something. I don't know. I haven't got a problem with it, but there you go. Sorry, Bob, did you want to say any more?
I can't see why the facade can't be retained. That's often the case, but you see this happening, especially in London. The facade is retained.
They're doing it on King Street.
May I just ask because I'm ignorant about this, I mean, would the who would have to allow this to happen?
Well, you'd have to go to planning committee.
But
Which
if it's
is
not got listed
part of
status, have they,
City
can they
Council.
Which is City Council planning committee, yes. And you better look up the application online and make any comments.
The Guildhall tomorrow.
Yeah.
Have a hot date with the Guildhall tomorrow. Yeah. Colin.
The Heritage Party doesn't have an official position on this issue, but I can tell you my personal view. And I think it would be a shame to lose that building. From what I saw of the proposals, I think they want to demolish the whole thing and rebuild it as offices and ground floor retail. Just my own opinion is that if it's just going to be for offices and retail, they should be able to repurpose the existing building to do just that. It should be empty inside, you know, you can really just reconvert it to, reconfigure it to office space and then open the ground floor to retail without damaging the building and keeping a bit of historic Cambridge in situ.
Okay. Thanks, Corin. I haven't missed anyone out on that round, have I? No. Okay, I've got lots of numbers on my page there. Right, I'm very conscious that we've got about 20 minutes left. So, James, you had a question. So, general questions on any topic you'd like to ask the candidates. James.
Yes, Tim. I was going to talk about what was for a while your favourite subject on Chesterton Battle, which was all the cut-offs to the village, and the fact for a while outside the pub we didn't even have, we had the High Street, Union Lane shut, Church Street is now shut permanently to vehicle traffic, and there was great problems with the buses getting up and down High Street, Scotland Road, and then going back out through the only access through Green End Road. Now the reason that the High Street, so I believe, was shut, because my mother lives literally just next to the post office almost, was because the new houses being built behind the post office were getting, private utility was putting in new gas mains to those properties. So it's just a general question really. There's obviously the GCP are doing stuff on Milton Road. Some of that is now, some of the streets, Kendall Way, Union Lane, are now reopened. I just wondered what all the candidates' opinions were, both in terms of the public works, but also the privatised utilities, because often they get away with just digging up roads, particularly in East Chesterton, with no notice. It's then the county then has to react. So eventually Church Street, the bollard was taken away for a couple of days just so there could be ambulance access. You know, if someone's got a heart attack going all the way around Milton Road. So I just wondered what your thoughts were on private utilities and the GCP doing, as they say, improvements to the area, and maybe if this were to happen in the future and you were elected, what would your view be?
That's a good question, James, and then we all know about the situation on East Road when they put in those bollards that prevented fire engines and ambulances getting through because cars weren't allowed to go through. That's an excellent question. So, candidates, would you like to answer James's question? And we started with you, Peter.
Right. Well, first of all, I think I keep looking at places like Church Street and keep thinking, why on earth have they blocked Church Street? I mean, I've read some waffle that it's to stop people speeding down Church Street. Well, it's about 100 yards from one T junction to the other. And how on earth you could speed down there, I don't know. And the other comment that was made about that was it's also to reduce the noise. Well, the noisiest things that are driving around Chesterton are loud motorcycles, and the blockage doesn't stop them. So I really can't see the point of Church Street being blocked. It would, as you say, have been a useful bypass on the occasions when they need to dig up the High Street, as they've been doing recently. But they didn't open it up this week, and there was one-way working system for most of last week, and they could have used Church Street to bypass it if they'd have had anybody with any sort of imagination. I think that more or less answers the question.
Yeah, you want the city council to have more imagination when it comes to planning these things, etc. Thank you. Alice?
Thanks. I think clearly one of the issues is that decisions are made about various things by various people that aren't very linked up, and as a councillor you get an email saying this is happening here and this is happening here, and none of it is very linked up, and you have to kind of do the mental maths of, right, well if this is closing, then what about here, and what does this mean about access? And clearly Union Lane was only supposed to be closed for 10 weeks, then it was closed for about 20. There should be, hopefully, it was the GCP doing those works, but are those people having to pay extra because they've gone above their contract, and people who are expecting expecting to not be able to access the road for 10 weeks, now 20 weeks. What's going on here? I think private utility, I mean, in Market Ward, if you go along Hills Road, it's just like speed bumps of where they cut open the street and then set it out, and it means you're going up and down, up and down. There's no requirement for private utility companies to actually do the work very well, because actually it benefits other companies, other private companies who then come in, fix it, and then it doesn't work, and then they come and fix it again. And it causes so many problems because there's such disjointed thinking, and it is an issue, of course, and it leads to kind of bizarre situations where people can't, well, not bizarre, but ridiculous situations where people can't get around. Yeah.
Okay, cheers. Bob?
Well, private utility companies do have to get permission from the county to dig up the road, so the county would have known about the closure of High Street to I think it was water and gas to be supplied to the new development behind the post office. Eventually the barriers on Church Street were removed to allow traffic to pass, but it was, as to be said, it was not a very successful, well, not a very good idea, because of course heavy goods vehicles find it very difficult to negotiate either Chapel Street or the other part of Church Street. So it's a difficult situation that the High Street is extremely narrow, especially at that point. So in a sense we have to live with what we've got, and there will be times when the roads have to be dug up for whatever reason. It's a matter of really, it is what it is.
Okay, cheers. Thank you, Bob. Colin?
Yeah, I know that area pretty well. It's around the corner from work. So I don't understand the point of the bollard on Church Street. It just makes more traffic, because people visiting the pub, the dental surgery, there's Snap nursery and the church, and all the private houses in there are motorists looking for parking, driving down Church Street, coming back, going down Chapel Street, and back and forth looking for parking. It actually just makes the traffic worse. So I really don't understand why it was put up. I'll ask you really, I saw all the work on Milton Road, and nobody seems to know what it is. So it's pretty extensive, but I don't know what's going on there, so you tell me.
Well, I mean, I know basically what they're doing, which is improving they're putting in new segregated cycleways. I think, is it a bus lane out or a bus lane in? I can't remember. And resurfacing, and they're also lining both sides of the road with new trees, because a lot of the blossom trees down there are already dead. I mean, I know that was what they were doing on Histon Road, 3 years ago, before the pandemic, and I think that's what they're doing. I mean, it's costing about 20 odd million. So, I mean, it's supposed to be to improve access for presumably the Waterbeach site, North East Cambridge, but also just generally to improve active transport for cyclists, because and buses. Yeah. The cycle lane up and down Milton Road has always been absolutely awful. So that's what they're doing in short.
Elizabeth?
The whole idea of Milton improvement is to speed traffic in and out of Cambridge. It's all part of the growth agenda, but we're not answering that one. I did notice the sign. Let me finish. I was going to talk about Chesterton High Street. I did notice the signs up by the public utility companies a week before it happened. And I said, "Oh God, Union Lane isn't that?" And I did contact our local councillors. I don't know what happened, because we've got a problem that we've got this multiple layers of government, which must make being a city councillor a nightmare, because the city council does some things The county council does other things, the Greater Cambridge Partnership does other things, and God knows what the national government's doing. So I think it's a nightmare. I'd hate in some ways to try and work that system. But it is as it is. I approve of the stoppage in Church Street, but I just think it was incredibly unfortunate, those particular series of circumstances. I do think there's probably, as you said, there's somebody in the county council who presumably keeps an eye on all the road blockages, but didn't work that
No,
hard.
the utilities have to get permission from the council.
Yeah, but presumably there's, I mean, it's easy to do a computer program, something that's, one would imagine to sort all those things out, but it doesn't seem to happen. Milton Road, I'll return to that now because it will be an improved road. I do think the underlying philosophy is to speed traffic in and out of Cambridge. And it's all outsourced, because I've been to quite a few of the webinars, it's all outsourced to a big engineering company who seems to do a lot of these big works for local councils, and they don't seem to be terribly good, from my observation of Milton Road and also Histon Road. They don't seem to be very good at project management. That's been a criticism of them.
Right. Sorry, another question? Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, just on a completely different topic, because I feel we've covered transport quite a lot. The 2023 Chesterton Festival, the Community Fund Day in the middle of June, has been cancelled, and one of the reasons they've given is that they got less than half of the grant that they normally get from the City Council. So just wondering what candidates, like how candidates would ensure, there's more free community activities for our area, and ensure that that's not
That's
cancelled
been
next year.
cancelled, as has the big weekend. Yeah, and quite a few other things. So Alice, you first. So what's the question? Basically, is what's your thoughts on the lack of funding for fun days for the folk of Cambridge? Really?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tricky. So the Community Festival will have been a separate funding stream to the big weekend, just to make that clear. But so I imagine this came through the community fund through the area committee that came out about a couple of months ago. This year we had about, 4 times as many applicants to that fund than we've ever had before. As a result of the cost of living crisis, a lot more local organisations and community organisations have been applying for funding through that grant pot, which made it much harder for us to allocate that money. I know that in the North area, it was oversubscribed. I think North area had about, I don't know the numbers, but it was oversubscribed by 2 or 3 times. So it makes it really, really hard for us as the council, but also councils, to decide how to allocate that money. And it's all based on need and based on fighting poverty and inequality and supporting the local community. All of the money gets kind of allocated on those along those lines. So it's not that money is being kind of given back to something completely different. It's about how do we use that money in the most effective way. And it's really sad to hear that this community event is going to be cancelled as a result of that. But unfortunately, we have no money from the government. The government is cutting and cutting and cutting local authority budgets, and it makes it much harder for us to support things like this when we've got the cost of living crisis, and we've got to build council homes, we've got to insulate homes, and we've got 101 things we've got to juggle. And I'm sure that there's ways that we can support further, whether that's through supporting local organisations who haven't got that money to get other funding. We have the Cambridge Volunteering Service. They provide support for organisations as well as advice on how to get more funding through alternative routes. So that's definitely something that I would support and encourage and help you to do if I was.
Okay. Yes. Sure. Thanks, Alice. Yeah. We're at time. Bob, anything on that?
Well, Liberal Democrats on the council have been pushing hard for the council not to have these knee-jerk cuts to services all across the city. We've been arguing against this the big weekend of now, the Chesterton Festival, over several council meetings. That cutting, another instance of this knee-jerk cutting is that they're proposing to close the public toilets, I think on Quayside, used last. Is it not true? Is it not Quayside? Well, it's one of the public toilets which is used by 35,000 people a year. This is a crazy, again, knee-jerk reaction to cutting funds for this sort of facility.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Colin?
Yeah, I think the councils are pretty hard pressed all across the country as far as funding goes. You know, my view is you have to prioritise stuff and allocate funding where you could. That's as much as I can say.
Elizabeth?
I'm very sad. We were all very sad. A lot of my friends are on various aspects of the Chesterton Festival. As a member of the WI, we always have a stall there, and we do quite well out of it, and it's a great fun day. I gather it was not just the funding, but people just got, you know, getting people to volunteer is getting harder and harder. But I do recognise the money to councils has been dropped dramatically. Now, as a member of the Logan's Meadow Committee, we've decided to go ahead with the picnic on Logan's Meadow on the Sunday, so that the people at least have a chance, well, it's not really, to come out and enjoy themselves, to try and ameliorate that. It was quite popular last year. We're going to have a band again, and a bird walk, and I think entertainment for children. So we're going to do a little mini picnic.
Okay, thank you. Peter?
Well, I'm dead against councils trying to plan fun for me. I'd rather do my own, thank you.
Jolly good.
Excellent. Right. Thank you for that question. Now, actually, going back to a previous topic that we're talking about, the utilities and the roads being all closed at the same time. Our very own Chris at the back there put forward a question. Do you want me to read it, Chris, or do you want to read it? You had an idea of.
You can read it, and it should be a very quick answer, because I think.
Okay, I'll try and bring your accent. We will try and end fairly soon. Chris's question. The current local authorities covering Cambridge, the City Council, the County Council, the Greater Cambridge Partnership and the Combined Authority are a confusing mess that few residents understand. I second that. With little democratic accountability for difficult decisions. Would you candidates, this is a question to you all, would you support the creation of a unitary authority of Greater Cambridgeshire, and if so, as a city councillor, what would you do to make this happen? So, question one, would you support just a unitary authority that covers all of the stuff that the city county council, Greater Cambridge Partnership and Combined Authority do? And if you did support it, how would you make it come about? And whose turn is it to go first? It is it Bob's? I think it's Bob's. Yeah, it's Bob's. So,
Yes,
good luck, Bob.
I do support the creation of a unitary authority for Cambridge and the surrounding area. It's something that the Lib Dems have been pushing for some time. I think everybody agrees the confusion about which local authority does what in this area is completely ridiculous. I'd go further and get rid of the combined mayor, I think, because Cambridge and Peterborough, two different cities, and it doesn't make any sense to me to try and push the two together just to have an elected mayor. A unitary authority would provide the correct level of democracy that's required.
Okay, Thanks, Bob. Colin?
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think it's it would be much simpler to just have one governing council. There is an overblown bureaucracy across the board, and I think it all really needs to be simplified. It's confusing even to me. I work in the NHS, so I know all about bureaucracy, so I'm all for it.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth?
Yes, I would welcome some more democratic processes. The GCP, I believe, is undemocratic at its very top. We have people representing the uni, some county councils and city councillors, and sometimes it's not always obvious where the democracy is. And I think this current thing with the city council and the county council and all the other things are very confusing and not very transparent to the man and woman in the street. I lived and worked for a long time in Swansea. We went through unitary authorityisation. It took 2 or 3 years. I remember going to a reaction, a practice, and I was representing higher education. It was most interesting to watch them do it. They first of all predicted we'd get rid of lots of people and they'd sell off all these buildings, and we seemed to have the same amount of people afterwards and the same number of buildings. But at least one knew where it was clearer where you could go and it was more democratic. So I would be in favour of a unitary authority. Got there in the end.
Okay, thank you. Peter?
I would certainly support the creation of a unitary authority for what I call Greater Cambridge. I don't think it should include Peterborough or more distant places. It would just become as unmanageable as the county council is now if it did that. So yes, and in order to achieve it, we just have to lobby Parliament quite heavily because it needs legislation to actually get it implemented.
Okay, thank you. Alice, and your final word of this one.
Thanks. Clearly something has to be done. I mean, it's very confusing, even for us who are involved in it. I've been a councillor for 2 years and I'm still confused about how things work sometimes. I don't know enough about all the different technicalities and the proposals and how it would work, but something needs to happen, and in order to improve democracy and democratic participation in Cambridge, there are various other things we should be doing as well. You know, why is the government bringing in voter ID? How do we encourage people who don't generally get involved in politics? Why is the room really empty? You know, we've got to do other things as well to make politics more interesting, and you know, people relate to local authorities as well. It's amazing how much local authorities do for people that people might not be aware of how we can support them and help them in various ways, and how important the work is that we do. But yeah, I agree.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone from the floor want to ask any final questions or no?
When are we going to Haymakers?
Who wants to go first on the... Okay, there is again a question that LJ would like to ask. Then we'll have this last question and then we'll wrap up.
Is everyone happy to stay? Like, I know we've overrun. Like, before I ask the last question. Like, yeah. This might be controversial. In my opinion, the party system appears to do more harm than good in local politics. I'd argue it does nationally as well, but let's stick with local politics for a moment. The depressing voting along party lines that I've seen in council is a prime example of this. Please can you explain what you think the party system brings to local politics?
A good question. And Colin, you're first on this one.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I don't think political parties really should be involved in local issues at all. It would be much preferable to have people standing as independents and being elected on who they are and rather than party policies. So, but unfortunately, this is the situation we find ourselves in. I don't know what you can do to change it.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Elizabeth, you're next.
Yes, it's quite a good question. I joined the Greens because I wanted to do something about the environment and social justice. Now, if I joined the other parties, I don't think they're so good at that. A lot of local parties are whipped and everyone has to obey, whereas Green parties are not. I would be more for working in groups, working together on issues. And I think we've got a fundamental problem in our democracy, and that is the first past the post. I would much prefer proportional representation.
Okay, thank you. Peter.
Yes. I think, well, maybe I'm being rotten here, but I think the party system enables the electorate, who probably aren't that involved in either issues or politics, to identify someone who probably shares their opinion. I think it would help with local democracy if we had far more local referenda and we actually found out what the people want, because all too often it's the party line, regardless of how many people support it or not.
Okay, thank you. Alice.
I don't know, I have a lot of thoughts on this. I think that obviously people choose whether or not they stand as an independent or within a line of a political party, and the reasons for that are obviously very varied. In some areas it's all independents by choice of the people who are there, and that works. But I think as a relatively new councillor, I would say that actually being a councillor is a huge amount of work. I think people don't really appreciate how much work being a councillor is, and actually having the support of the party that you're elected with around you and the people that you work with can be really helpful at times when a lot of councillors come and become councillors for a short amount of time and then leave. Having kind of the knowledge that the other councillors within that party bring, I think is interesting. But I mean, I don't know, I think locally people aren't always completely aligned with the national views of their party, and that locally you can have a local party that is a very cares about local issues in a very particular way. I don't know. I'm very struggling.
I think it's a good and difficult question. Bob.
I find my thoughts, opinions and views are pretty well aligned with those of my Liberal Democrat colleagues. I get a huge amount of support as a candidate from the Liberal Democrat Party, and they offer a lot of training both for candidates and for people who are elected to be councillors. So there's a terrific amount of backroom activity, if you like, in the way they support candidates and councillors. So I'm quite happy with the party system. Somebody did mention proportional representation. That would be a much better, that would be a great improvement, not only for local democracy, but obviously for national democracy as well. So, like them or loathe them, the parties are here to stay. And for me, it works.
Okay, thank you very much. And on that note, once again, thank you for coming. Let's hope there's a better turnout in the elections, which I'm sure you do. And once again, thank you to the candidates. It's quite a daunting task to come and, with no knowledge of the questions that are going to be asked. And well done to all of you. Thank
Well
you
done to
very
the
much.
organisers as well.
And yeah, well done to everyone else who put all this together. Okay?
Brilliant sharing too.
Yeah.
Pleasure. So there was question was if anyone wants to carry on this conversation, there is apparently a pub in the village that's got a flooded pavement outside it.
And I bet you the Conservative candidate says local Conservative candidate on the bus.
But there is the pub. Maybe we should, if you want to, I think a few will be journeying to. And James has said he'll buy the first round.
Oh, that's it.
Right.